I'm Wendy Wilson, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Realizing Potential. I've been in the city of Cordele probably for the last almost 2 years. I think I'm approaching that timeline as it relates to my current role as Executive Director of Albany State University, the Cordele campus, and enjoying it tremendously, and particularly feel excited, or I am excited about expanding the level of higher education in that community, particularly Crisp County. So one of the things that are reasons that I've been particularly excited about this whole endeavor is that I've aligned myself and been very grateful and appreciative of the people in that area who also recognize the value and the importance of higher education. One of those individuals is my guest in the studio today, and he is none other than Grant Buckley. Grant, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Wendy.
Good,
thank you.
Good.
Good to be here.
Yes, and let me formally say thank you. I hope I've said that before, but now that we have this viewing audience, I do greatly appreciate all of your committed support to seeing Albany State being a success within that community. You've done that unyielding, and I'm greatly appreciative of that.
You're very welcome.
And
like you, I'm somewhat new to the community
yes.
as well. It's just been not quite 3 years for me.
Okay, very good. Well, let's get a little historical perspective about you. Of course, the focus is how your educational pursuits, particularly at the collegiate level, have benefited past career moves and positions, and certainly the one that you're in now. So tell the viewers where you went to undergraduate, graduate work, why you chose those majors and what institutions.
Okay. I grew up in the small town of Swainsboro, Georgia, and got out of high school in 1980.
Okay.
At that time, I went to Georgia Tech and got a business degree, a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management is what they called it at the time, and got out in 1984. And then I was out of school for about 15 years before I decided to go back to graduate school.
Okay.
And I went to law school. That was when I was 37 years old. Started off in New Orleans at Loyola University
yes.
there, and was there 1 year and made pretty good grades. And because of that, the University of Georgia let me transfer into the law school in Athens. So I finished there for the other 2 years and graduated with a law degree at age 40, and passed both the Georgia bar and the Florida bar, and then practiced for about 13 years. And then came back into the position I'm in now about 3 years ago.
Okay, now what area, I'm curious, what area did you, when you were practicing of law, did you specialize in?
It was very specialized. It was in asbestos litigation, and that segment of litigation had a life cycle of its own. It started in the early 80s, and claims went up, and then kind of in a bell curve came back down, and what we did was defended primarily railroads from lawsuits that employees would file against the railroad related to asbestos.
Interesting.
So it was defense related.
Okay.
And the problem with that is there was an end to that litigation,
yes.
and our law firm went from 5 lawyers down to 1 lawyer.
Okay.
And I was going to have to go hang a shingle out, so to speak, and do divorces and criminal work, and I decided I didn't want to do that. I'd been in this business I'm in now for a long time before I ever went to law school.
Okay, very good. When you said asbestos, it's like you don't hear about asbestos as much, and so again, as you mentioned, the bell curve, it kind of on the downtrend, and because that's not used or not supposed to be used.
Right.
So that would make sense that you would have to go back. But now I'm curious because I did not know that there was a specific major in that area. So tell us what was the why you gravitated to that field.
In the asbestos?
No. The industrial. Tell me your major again.
At undergrad?
Yes.
Industrial management.
Industrial management.
They didn't have a business degree at the time. It was primarily an engineering school.
Okay.
But they did have
that concentration,
non-engineering deal, and so that was what I went into, and I enjoyed it. It was basically a business degree. You had marketing, economic development, all of that. But when I had been thinking about graduate school for a long, long time. In fact, when I was 27, I took the LSAT test for law school, and really just came in right in the middle of the bell curve at the 50th percentile. That combined with my poor grades at Georgia Tech, I knew I wouldn't get into any of the law schools in Georgia because you had to have good grades or a good LSAT score. So I kind of gave up on it for about 10 years. And then 10 years later, when I was 37, a friend of mine who was about my age got accepted into law school, but not in Georgia. It was outside of Georgia. And at that time, when she did it, I realized, she told me there were good law schools, but their standards were lower than the ones that were in Georgia. They were still accredited law schools. So when she did it, I said, I thought about it a long time ago. I'm going to take that test again, and I did, and made almost the same score I did 10 years earlier.
Did you? Okay.
But this time I applied to some schools outside of Georgia and was accepted. And so then I decided to leave my career cold turkey and become a student again at 37. And I was a lot better student at 37 than I was at 18 years old.
That's something. I think it's that maturity level has a lot to do with that. You have a greater appreciation and understanding, and you understand time is ticking away, and you need to maximize the moment, and then we won't even get into the cost factor, you know. So I've been in similar situations myself, but that's good. But what I love that you speak to is particularly that non-traditional student, because they will oftentimes, I find them to be, when I've taught them in the past, some of the best students, because they're focused and they're committed to the moment, very disciplined and very intentional and deliberate about everything that they do. So they wind up being the ideal student. Plus they want to get in and get out. So they're, not in that floundering phase of their life.
Well, and honestly, law school, I was scared to death. I didn't want to flunk out. And because I knew it was difficult. But my fellow students who were a lot younger than me, most of them knew that I had done my reading. A lot of them had not, and I didn't want to get in trouble in a classroom, and like I saw some of my younger colleagues getting in trouble because they just hadn't done the homework. And that's all they ask, is for you to put the effort in.
Absolutely. Yeah, most instructors want that too. I'm here, so I need you to be here as well. So now let's fast forward a little bit, because again, you had been laying the groundwork, and I'm sure your legal background, you find that you are able to parlay that into the whole industrial piece. But now you are Cordele, the executive director of Cordele Crisp County Industrial Development Council.
Correct.
What does that responsibility entail? And tell us a little bit about that entity.
It's in the field of economic development, and that basically you're trying to create jobs or help create jobs. You don't do it on your own, but you facilitate companies, and they may be, usually are existing industries, not new companies, but sometimes new companies come knocking on the door. So your job is to kind of be a matchmaker and to answer questions for newcomers, or, like I said, existing industry. Sometimes existing industry may need some help with government services of some sort. So you're really working at a macro level, a high level, with decision makers and things like that, to try to, again, resolve issues and facilitate job creation. And I had done it for about 10 years before I went to law school, most of that time at the state level for the state of Georgia, traveling the state, taking companies around to different communities, hoping, and again, being a matchmaker, so to speak. And then I did it at the local level in North Georgia, Gainesville, Georgia, for 2 years. And that was all before law school. And then now I've been back. I'm still maintaining my law licenses.
Very good.
In Florida and Georgia, which means taking continuing legal education and paying them some money every year. But I'm very careful about not rendering legal opinions. In fact, we have lawyers that we hire, and they're happy that I'm a lawyer because we can communicate.
Absolutely.
So now I'm the one engaging lawyers.
Okay, interesting how that's all evolved. Tell us the great things. And so I'm as the older I get, I think it's important in terms of being transparent, because we can frame something in such an ideal and perfect fashion, and then we still exist in reality. So then when someone encounters that, they're like, oh, you didn't tell us the whole story. So Cordele, Crisp County, trying to grow and develop. But let's also talk about some of the challenges and why that is then a motivation for you to invite industries in to help develop and grow.
Cordele, Crisp County is a relatively small community, about 24,000 in the whole county. But it is on an interstate. It's got a lot of assets going for it in infrastructure. It's on an interstate and also has a 4-lane highway coming to Albany off the interstate, as well as further down to Tallahassee, which is Georgia 300. But we've also got 3 railroads that pass through Cordele. You've got 2 main lines of CSX and Norfolk Southern. They're basically going between Atlanta and Jacksonville. Heavy traffic on those railroads. And then a 3rd railroad, which is a short line that goes from Savannah across through Cordele and on to Americus. So those are great pieces of infrastructure there. Of course, you have to have sufficient water and wastewater capacity and natural gas for manufacturing.
Sure.
And that's mostly what I deal with. Tourism and retail are certainly important, and I encourage that as much as I can, but that's not typically what I'm involved with.
Okay.
What are the challenges? It's the same challenges that much of rural Georgia has. Georgia is the largest state east of the Mississippi River. So you've got a lot of land area that's not, a lot of it's not populated very much, and much of South Georgia is not populated like North Georgia is. And so the further you get away from the Atlanta airport and much of the metropolitan infrastructure, the more difficult it becomes for companies to lose their comfort level. A lot of folks like that. So
Yes.
It's really just the same rural challenges that many of us have across certainly South Georgia and even some other parts of North Georgia that are rural.
Okay. Good. I think it was just important that we, provide the whole. But then it also provides a lesson that you still persevere, you still move on, and you still sell. And there are just countless reasons why you would want to. I'm sure, it's lower taxes in terms of businesses, and just the opportunity to expand your presence as an organization, a company, or whatever it is that you might be in this still burgeoning area.
It is, and economic development is a process. There's no end. It never stops. It's a lifelong process. So you want to create, you're right, you want to create jobs and investment in a community, because it does help maintain or lower taxes, but it also creates jobs for the community and helps to keep your younger folks in more rural communities. But for businesses, what they often find is the cost of doing business is much lower in a rural community for pure production purposes. Oftentimes the wages are slightly less the further you get away from metropolitan cities.
Sure.
So it adds to the bottom line oftentimes.
Absolutely. Good. And you've been in the role for you said about?
This summer will be 3 years, and then prior to that, I was, before I practiced law, 10 years, and then I practiced law for about 13 years.
Okay.
So I still have some friends that are remember me from my younger days, but all of us are getting a little bit older, and now you got some new younger folks coming into the field, which is good.
It is, and I know you're doing your part in terms of trying to groom them, which is what it should be, to pass the baton, and but of course you're still relevant because you have a wealth of knowledge and expertise that will certainly help to advance them, or to more importantly develop them in their respective roles. I'm curious, and I ask this of my guests, who do you admire on a national or international scale that we would be familiar with, and why?
You know, Governor Deal here was at the national level as a congressman, and so he's been there. But one thing I admire about him and others like him are folks who have a very level demeanor in civil discourse. They don't raise their voices very much. I very much appreciate people who can control their emotions and engage in civil discourse with people who may have differences of opinion without anybody getting too crazy on either side and elevating the temperature.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's in current day.
Okay.
And of course, there's some historical figures as well.
Okay.
I think there's a movie out right now about Winston Churchill, and having read some of his books, then I'm pretty impressed with what he did back in the day.
Right, right. I heard everything you said, but I was also struck by when you mentioned Deal and that quality about him that you admire. I was having a conversation just last night with my mentor about that very same thing, and I was complimenting him on his ability to quickly diffuse. I am still trying to master that in terms of trying to maintain a level temperament. Because whatever it is, oftentimes, hopefully we are involved in our roles or whatever the environment we find ourselves in. Hopefully we're intentional enough that we're passionate about it. And with that, it's sometimes because you are so passionate about it, if things don't seem like they're going the way that they need to go or the way that you feel that they should go, and people have differences of opinion, as you spoke of earlier, it can sometimes get a little heated, but you still need as an individual to maintain a level of control so that the message in particular does not get lost. And again, I'm still trying, I'm a work in progress with that. And I'm trying to master, I don't have a poker face at all, so I don't need to embark upon that game either, because you can read what I'm feeling on my face. But I shared that complimenting him, that he has ability to quickly diffuse the moment. And it's in the tone and the words that come out and being able to recapture that. So that is a very admirable trait for an individual to have, especially when you're leading and you have influence.
Right. I mean, but you can never control someone else. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
up to them as to how they react. But
right.
But perhaps you can influence people with your demeanor, or a timing, some great sense of humor in something to diffuse it or whatever.
Absolutely.
But I've always had the impression of him, Governor Deal, fairly level-headed and perhaps delaying things for another day, whatever. But I don't know that I've ever seen him elevate his emotions to where it got out of control.
Good. That's good. That's a good trait to have. That's a good trait to have. When you and I were discussing and I was extending you the invitation, I kind of gave you a little, we're going to discuss this, and this, and I'm going to ask you these questions. And one of them was, name a book that has most influenced you. And I loved what you said. You're like, oh, I've got so many. I'm like, yes, I love that, because I too am an avid reader. So what books have influenced you outside of your preferred religious texts that you find yourself either actually going back to do a reread, or just remembering narratives or passages that you?
Well, when you asked me that question a few weeks ago, just the one that's popped in my mind was one I alluded to a while ago, which was a series of books written by Winston Churchill about his time in World War II. It was about a 7-volume set that I found in an antique store. Just picked them up and began reading them. After I read them, I said, well, Grant, you could read the whole Bible now, because you've
done this
run
7
so
volume.
much. But I did persevere, and it was just amazing hearing his personal thoughts about what was going on in and what the movie is called The Darkest Hour, which is out now. But it was a dark hour in reality. He was by himself. He in England at one point before America came in, and Europe was closing in around him, and just listening to his personal thoughts is just amazing, stepping back in time, and
Right.
that's what I was thinking about.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. You also made me think about we stand back and admire great women and men who have reached, pinnacle points in their respective industries or areas that they pursued or found themselves in. But we also miss the point when and of course the darkest hour I'm sure relates to because of the war, but it was I'm sure very dark because when you start reading biographies of great individuals, you also learn that there can be very lonely moments, and many of them.
Absolutely, and he was very lonely at one point before America came in. I didn't know any of this before I read it,
Sure.
but Hitler was knocking on the door, and the only thing separating him was the English Channel and some high cliffs there. But beyond that, England and Winston Churchill was by himself. In fact, I think there was a lot of debate within his administration. Do we need to negotiate a truce
Right.
rather than risk an invasion? And he was adamant. He said, no, there's no way we're going to do that. So he was willing to risk it all.
Wow.
But he, I'm sure, felt very lonely at that time because there were a lot of people advising him differently.
Right, right. And then there's that whole, you're making decisions that can transform lives, a multitude of individuals, countries, if you will. And that's a huge responsibility, coupled with the fact that you can't share those decisions with everybody. Then I'm sure that relates to leadership even today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Economic development is a team effort, and different pieces of government provide different services that all go to, like I said, in my case, mostly manufacturing companies. They consume those services, like natural gas or wastewater or fire protection or whatever the case may be, tax rates. So it's a team effort, and it's a continuing process. Again, educational, but those leaders, those politicians. I admire anyone who's ever run for office. Period. I ran for office once but wasn't elected, but through that experience, admire anyone who's ever put themselves out in the public and signed qualification papers and written a check.
Yeah.
Just that act itself is a sacrifice, and you're exposing yourself that
Indeed.
You don't have to. I mean, a lot of people would just as soon stay at home and not do that, but it
Right.
says something to me, to the fact that someone even goes through those motions, even if they don't win. You're making a statement of public service.
You are, and you're right. You're putting your whole life on a public platform. Yeah, and we know how interesting politics can get. We're living that right now. Well, I feel like I have to have a part two, so I'm going to invite you back to discuss the great things that are happening. Certainly under your leadership, I've respected your work and admired your work, and certainly always want to lock arms with anyone that is a proponent of education, and certainly higher education, because we both know how that can transform individuals, families, communities, and it just has a ripple effect, and that's certainly what we're trying to do within that area. So I thank you for that.
And I'm an example, and I still believe it's a lifelong process.
It
to
is.
the degree you want to engage with education, I mean, obtaining more.
Sure.
It's never too late.
Never ending, never ending. Well, Grant Buckley, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely,
I enjoyed it.
anytime. Viewers, thank you for joining me for this edition of Realizing Potential. I'm Wendy Wilson, and I will see you next time.